This is Stone Cold Export, and today we are testing which mid-range GPU you should consider buying now that the prices have fallen. So in this video we are testing 3 mid-range GPUs which sells for about the same price, at least where I live. Things might be different where you live, so you have to check the prices yourself. The cards are the RTX 3060. This is the Asus TUF Gaming model. It's a fantastic model actually. Then there's the a bit old these days, the RX 5700 XT. This sells for around about the same price, at least over here. Maybe things are different where you live. And then the last one is actually inside that computer, and that is the RX 6600 XT. That's the MSI Gaming X model in that computer. Now these 3 GPUs are around about the same price over here anyway. So I figured, it'd be interesting to see which one performs the best and which one you should consider getting. There are some differences here. For instance, the 5700 XT doesn't support ray tracing at all. And it is a bit older, but even so it still performs pretty good, as you will see in a moment. And the RTX 3060, support for DLSS, 12 gigs of video memory on this model. And yeah, so this particular model is actually quite big. It won't fit in the Silverstone case here. So the test system today was the Asus B550i Gaming Strix. These names are so long. AMD Ryzen R5 5600X, not 3600, 5600X, and 16 GB of memory, running at 3600 MHz, so obviously in dual channel CL18. The sticks are dual rank as well, so you get a bit of performance out of that. Then we use a 650 watt power supply. That's plenty. And yeah, this was all done on an open test bench because these GPUs, they don't fit in that case, so it had to be on an open test bench or a large case. And we targeted high settings, but you can find all these settings down in the description. I haven't put those up on the charts this time. Hopefully you're fine with that. And without further ado, let's get into the numbers. ACC runs best on NVIDIA GPUs, which is evident by the fact that the 3060 at 1080p is faster than both of the AMD cards. Even though the 6600 XT is actually getting pretty close. Do note the frame times on the 6600 though. As we move up to 1440p, the 3060 maintains a lead over both AMD cards, with it being slightly faster than the 6600 XT and about 10% faster than the 5700 XT. Again, do note the worst frame times on the 6600 XT. I'm not quite sure what's causing this, but it was consistently less smooth than the 5700 XT and the 3060, although moving up to 4K, none of these cards are able to hit 60 frames per second at 4K, but the 3060 gets close at 57.2 frames per second on average, although none of these cards are really 4K cards, in my opinion at least. In ANNO 1800 at 1080p, the 5700 XT comes at 4% ahead of the 3060, and the 6600 XT is very close behind. So very good performance across the board from these mid-range GPUs. Moving up to 1440p, and well, 1440p might be more suitable for these cards unless you're aiming for high frame rates with high settings. The 5700 XT is here again the victor at 92 frames per second on average, close to 5% ahead of the 3060, which now has overtaken the 6600 XT. Again, do note the frame times here as well. The 3060 has a bit worse frame times than the AMD GPUs in this title. Moving up to 4K, the 6600 XT is particularly weak compared to the 5700 XT and even the 3060, which are both outperforming the 6600 XT here without any issues whatsoever. Hopefully the 6600 XT can redeem itself in another title. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla at 1080p, the 6600 XT edges out the 5700 XT and humiliates the RTX 3060 by 34%. At 1440p, the 5700 XT edges out the 6600 XT, and the margin to the 3060 is now down to 23%. At 4K though, the 5700 XT is again edging out the 6600 XT, and it's now 38% ahead of the 3060, although none of the cards provide a smooth experience at 4K. I have caved and started benchmarking Battlefield 2042, even though I prefer Battlefield 5. Hopefully you'll forgive me for that, and here the 6600 XT outperforms the 5700 XT by 5%, and it outperforms the 3060 by close to 22%, which is notable. Getting similar performance out of the 3060 is pretty easy though. I benchmarked with DLSS in quality mode as well, which made it match the 5700 XT, but I did not include those runs in the final result. Moving up to 1440p. Here the 6600 XT's advantage has eroded, and it is now slightly behind the 5700 XT, which itself is 17% ahead of the 3060. Moving up to 4K, even though no owners of these cards should move up to 4K. At 4K, performance falls hard, and the 5700 XT is now down to 50 frames per second, coming in 14% ahead of the 6600 XT and 29% ahead of the 3060. We also benchmarked with ray tracing on here, but we'll save those numbers for the ray tracing benchmarks at the end. In Cyberpunk 2077, the 6600 XT comes out in front at 1080p, coming in 6% ahead of the 5700 XT and 9% ahead of the RTX 3060. At 1440p, you'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference between these cards, as all of them manage slightly more than 50 frames per second on average, with similar frame times as well. And of course, the 4K performance is pretty poor to say the least, with none of them delivering what I would consider a playable experience. Next up is Elden Ring. In Elden Ring, the 5700 XT is in the lead, with the 6600 XT coming in close behind. The 5700 XT is 22% ahead of the 3060 here, and to be fair, this game does have some stuttering issues, so I would not place much stock in the 0.1% lows, as the standard deviation between runs is quite high in the dataset. Moving up to 1440p instead, and here all the cards are able to maintain over 60 frames per second on average, but it is the 5700 XT that again is in the lead, with the 3060 bringing up the rear. At 4K, the cards perform pretty similar, with none of them able to deliver what I would call a playable experience in this game, and none of them are really standing out, so yeah, it's a draw at 4K, I would say. Equally bad performance. Moving along to Elder Scrolls Online, and in Elder Scrolls Online, the RX 6600 XT comes out on top at 141.9 frames per second on average, and in this game we actually benchmark at maximum quality in Somerset Isles, which is pretty demanding on the GPU. Now it comes in 7% ahead of the 5700 XT and about 17% ahead of the RTX 3060 at 1080p. Moving up to 1440p, and it's now down to 2% ahead of the 5700 XT, which basically means identical performance, 104 FPS versus 102 FPS. That's not really noticeable at all. But it did beat out the RTX 3060 by 9%, although that also managed 5.4 frames per second average. And well, I'm unsure if you will notice the difference. In 4K, the 5700 XT actually comes out on top, and it's now 13% ahead of the RX 6600 XT. And the RX 6600 XT comes in dead last here, with the RTX 3060 a single percent faster. So yeah, it actually went from being in a fairly decent lead at 1080p to being dead last at 4K. And that's the issue with the 6600 XT. It's not very good at 4K, and it becomes progressively worse as you up the resolution. Moving on to our next game. Forza Horizon 5 is next, and here the 6600 XT really stretches its legs, coming in 12% ahead of the 5700 XT and a massive 42% ahead of the RTX 3060. It is full AMD domination here at 1080p. Moving up to 1440p, the 6600 XT is still out in front, even though not by quite as much as at 1080p, with a minor 7% lead over the 5700 XT and a mere 34% lead over the 3060. At 4K, the AMD cards deliver a good experience, with the 5700 XT taking the lead by 2% over the 6600 XT and a more substantial 22% over the RTX 3060. Moving along to Halo Infinite, and here the RTX 3060 comes out in front at 126.6 frames per second on average at 1080p. The frame times are quite poor here though, falling below 60 frames per second. Even so, it did manage a 6% lead over the 6600 XT, which is very close in performance to the 5700 XT. At 1440p, the 5700 XT and the RTX 3060 are on par with each other, with the 6600 XT coming in a close third. Again though, the frame times on the 3060 is quite a bit lower than on the AMD cards, and I'm not sure why. Moving up to 4K, and here the 5700 XT is taking the lead, but all of the cards exhibit poor frame times at 4K and they are not really suited for 4K gaming, and at least not in this title. Moving on to the next title, Hitman 3. Here the AMD cards leave the 3060 in the dust again, with the 6600 XT coming in 19% ahead, with the 5700 XT close behind that. At 1080p. At 1440p, the 5700 XT and 6600 XT are essentially on par with each other, and they are both about 16% faster than the RTX 3060. So again, AMD performs pretty well in Hitman 3. We can see that also at 4K, where the 5700 XT takes the lead and comes in 29% ahead of the RTX 3060. Now, I also did some ray tracing tests, but not on the 5700 XT, because that doesn't support ray tracing. Starting off in Cyberpunk 2077, and here I tried to get a playable experience with ray tracing set to medium at 1080p, without sacrificing too much image quality. With DLSS balanced, we managed 65.1 frames per second on average on the 3060, which was 25% faster than the 6600 XT with FSR set to quality. You can drop FSR to balance to achieve better performance, but the image quality at that point is very poor. FSR quality is as low as I would go with FSR 1.0 at least. So no surprise, the 3060 is dominant in ray tracing. We also enabled ray tracing in Battlefield 2042, which has a fairly light ray tracing load, and that meant the 6600 XT was able to edge out the 3060 by 6%, and both cards delivered a very playable experience at 1080p with RT on. So, in conclusion then, the fastest mid-range GPU depends on the resolution. At 1080p, the 6600 XT was actually the fastest GPU of all, beating out the 5700 XT by around 5%, and I believe it was around 14% faster than the 3060. And the average figures, we can have those on screen now to show you, so you can use those to determine the best value that you can get. You just take the, depending on what you want to do, you take the price divided by the FPS if you want dollars per FPS, or if you want FPS per dollar, you just take the average FPS divided by the price of the GPU. Then you can use that to find out the best value GPU in your region, because the prices vary so much. I can't really give you a sort of a general recommendation, but say they were all the same price. Suppose if you want 1080p high refresh rate gaming, the 6600 XT seems to be the way to go. The 5700 XT, well, it's a bit older. It still performs pretty well, but I think if you wanted to go with the 5700 XT, then it should be a bit cheaper than the 6600 XT, in my opinion, because they perform so similar to each other. At 1440p, for instance, the 5700 XT is actually faster than the 6600 XT, but it's not by much. It's like 2% or something like that. So essentially, it is the same performance. While they both beat out the RTX 3060 by around 8-9%, and even that, it's not a lot these days. I mean, 8-9%, 110 FPS instead of 100 FPS. It's not that much. So, well, if you can, well, it's highly likely that in your region the RTX 3060 is probably more expensive than the 5700 XT and the 6600 XT, because on the used markets the NVIDIA cards seem to be going for a bit more than the AMD cards, at least over here. Maybe it's different where you live. And because of that, the 3060 is often a bit more expensive than the 6600 XT and 5700 XT, and I don't really think it's worth it at that price. I mean, you do get DLSS, but is DLSS really worth it? I don't know. Not for me, but maybe you are of a different of opinion. Maybe you need the encoder for some reason. Maybe you're streaming or something. There are a lot of things to take into consideration when you are choosing a GPU. And of course I can give you the numbers, the figures. You can try to figure out which one you prefer. Of course, for ray tracing, the RTX 3060 is going to be faster than the 6600 XT in games such as Doom and Control and Cyberpunk, and these games that have really high-end ray tracing features. Then the 3060 is going to outperform the 6600 XT by quite a bit. So if you mainly want to play these eye candy games with ray tracing, then maybe consider the 3060 over the others. And of course, the 5700 XT doesn't do ray tracing at all. At 4K, again, the 5700 XT is the quickest card here, or the fastest card, but it's not really by that much. It's a bit faster than the 6600 XT and the RTX 3060, and again, none of these cards are really suited for 4K gaming, so yeah, you should really be looking to spend a bit more on a GPU if you want to do 4K gaming, at least if you want to do 4K high refresh rate gaming. If you want to do 4K 30, you can do that. 4K 60, you'll have to decrease quite a bit of the settings down, because, well. And yeah, my recommendation basically is, if you want high refresh rate gaming, 1080p, 6600 XT. If you want ray tracing and max eye candy and stuff like that in the newest AAA titles, consider the 3060. If you can get a good deal, 5700 XT is still a very good card. Doesn't do ray tracing, but if you are mainly use an FPS gaming, for instance, you should be fine with that. For 1440p high refresh rate gaming, either the 6600 XT or the 5700 XT, depending on which you can get for cheaper. And for 4K, look elsewhere, basically. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and farewell.